WESN.
Reagan once said that he always felt the most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." It's a very interesting quote from the then President of the United States, and he was speaking about providing financial assistance to farmers with the ultimate goal of allowing farmers to be independent, to return farming to real farmers, as he puts it, and to not have the government, through their programs, control everything. The irony, of course, is he was looking to transition, but until then, the government had to act compassionately and responsibly. And in doing so, they committed record amounts of assistance to farmers, spending more in that year, 86, than any previous administration spent during its entire tenure. Or at least, that's what President Reagan claimed. But I want to highlight the quote itself. The most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." And it sums up the dichotomy of government's role in society very well. We criticize this thing that we are dependent on. We don't just criticize this thing that we are dependent on. We continue to demand that they meet our needs while we criticize them for being the worst. And this is not specific to the PNM, this is just in general. And granted, there are times when the criticism is warranted, and many times the criticism is warranted. It's not the fact that we criticize them, it's the fact that somehow we still have expectations of performance, expectations of assistance, expectations of effectiveness, while criticizing the lack of effectiveness. And then the other part of the quote is when he went on to say that government must act compassionately and responsibly. And generally speaking, I believe effective communication would be that when you separate those two things, that means that the factors of one are not necessarily equal to the factors of the other. What you need to do for compassion is not necessarily, although there might be some overlap, of what you need to do to be responsible. And right now we're seeing compassion overtaking responsibility in certain areas of the Western world. Can't necessarily speak for the Eastern part of the equation because their politics is quite different. But we're seeing where compassion overtakes responsibility, things get out of whack, things start to go haywire, things start to break down. Businesses in America are closing down because of it, because of a lack of responsibility. And one could argue over here there's something similar that's been going on for quite some time. With the veneer of compassion, we see at times irresponsible spending, where a lot of programs are meant to give you a fish every day as opposed to helping you reach the point where you could fish on your own. So, teach a man to fish, you make him independent for a lifetime. Give a man a fish, and he is dependent on you tomorrow to give him another fish. And then he'll vote for you. But also there's just the fact that even a well-intentioned government could screw up implementation. even a government acting in good faith, because by the time it reaches that level, the situation is usually very complex, and more importantly, ironically, trust is a two-way street, and at times the government will look at private business interests and not always trust them, sometimes for good reason, sometimes to the detriment of said industry, whichever one it is. You could plug in whatever example you want. And then what we get is a government so concerned about not enriching private business that an industry essentially becomes dependent. Its independence collapse, and it will collapse once government pulls out, and then government will complain, well, we want to pull out, but these people, they can't stand on their own 2 feet. Well, you set them up to be so. It's interesting how incentives really drive human behavior. Here in TNT, we don't necessarily understand how to utilize incentives to encourage behavior that is sustainable. Is it because politics, our low level, I would argue, politics demands or even requires politicians to keep giving us a fish? Let's not teach them how to fish. And ironically, then it touches on a subject that is highly emotional for half of the population. Dependency leads to servitude. Servitude leads to and of course, now that we are dependent, problems become insurmountable obstacles. And it's almost like a self-feeding loop where fixing the system means to having to pull up our sleeves and get involved into the mess to untie the Gordian knot, or find a sword to chop it in two, like Alexander did. But we don't want to do that because we have conditioned ourselves to be dependents of the state, not citizens who participate in the democratic process. Or you might cast a vote. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're properly participating in the democratic process. For all intents and purposes, you are a dependent. You infantilize yourself, looking up to politicians to be your parents, putting all your trust in them while complaining that they are so corrupt and inefficient. It makes no sense. But it's easier for you to depend on them to do it, and when they fail to do it, you could blame them. You don't necessarily blame yourself. I mean, ignorance was bliss for me until I started working in this field, and now, you know, sometimes knowledge is not necessarily all fun and games, because reality has a tendency to slap you in the face. So how do we get out of this? Because I feel that too many people are complacent now. We were rich. Rich people are complacent. And the problem is good times make weak men. Men who are less capable, men and women, who don't have the gumption to kind of dig themselves out of the hole they find themselves. Because make no mistake, Britain didn't put TNT in the hole that it finds itself in. No imperialist state put TNT in the hole that it finds itself in. We could try to blame colonialism and imperialism and America and Western international relations all we want for this, that, and the other, for the guns, for the drugs, for the oil baron, for the oil conglomerates, cartels and the prices, for the food inflation, whatever. But we were rich. And you can't tell me that someone stole outside of this country, stole all that oil and gas money. I don't think anybody could tell me that. Maybe I'm wrong, but pretty sure we weren't a colony in the 70s, or in the 90s, or in the early 2000s. We were rich. We were. And now we reach a point where our budget cannot easily go back to what it was before all of the energy revenues and tax revenues from energy. And we're not accustomed to not having enough money to spend our way out of our problems in the short term while not looking at the long-term consequences. But I'll just wrap it up by saying this. St. Francis of Assisi, someone who, I get it, not everybody is going to be Catholic, but he has a quote that I think is universal. He said, start by doing what's necessary, then do what's possible, and suddenly you are doing the impossible. Because right now it might seem as though to change our political landscape is impossible, but at the end of the day, what he's saying is, look, you just have to start. Lamenting over the difficulty and never starting is how you fail to launch. A lot of people do that in their personal lives. Hell, to some extent, so did I. I didn't know what I was doing. And now I'm here before you, trying to make sense out of nonsense. Because I live here. My family lives here. My friends live here. My countrymen live here. I would like for here to do reasonably well enough that we could have a reasonable standard of living. And right now, our standard of living for some of the people I know is okay, but for others, it's not okay. And it would be lazy and foolish of me to say, well, it's not affecting me quite as hard just yet, so I'm fine, so why bother? At some point, it can. It might. It could be a question of when, not if. So what are we going to do about it? Eventually, you can't do the impossible. We could do it if we try, as my co-host would say. Now, with that out of the way, let's kick off today's daily review. Just wanted to start with some interesting stories. First of all, the Olympics is now in the books, second Olympics where we haven't medaled. I find this an interesting debate. Ironically, I just opened up talking about, the government failing to do things. And now it looks as though people do want to bash the government for what has happened with regards to sports, right? Roger Daniel, Jonathan Farina, they hit back for a lack of support. Sporting talent wasting away. Meanwhile, ironically, the Ministry of Sport is also apparently taking some heat for making payments to elite athletes, to Olympians, because they didn't medal, obviously. We got no medals this round. So is it a waste of money? So we're complaining about a lack of support, but we're also complaining about wasted money. And I'm not entirely sure why, but Keshawn Walcott apparently is the primary example by which either the critics or the media is framing this around. And he was one of the two Trinbagonians who got to the finals. At the very least, I would think that his result, which is better than his gold medal winning result, although of course the conditions of the day could vary. But it's not as though he didn't have a respectable effort. He is the seventh best in the Olympics. I hesitate to say that to criticize that might be a bit unfair. He's already accomplished gold for us. One would think that he should get a little bit of leeway. And we're not talking about tens of millions or even millions of dollars. Hundreds of thousands of dollars so that our athletes don't necessarily have to work a day job and then train in the night to somehow compete at an elite level. Because that's, one of my friends was complaining about that, because there's some truth to that historically in TNT. And I think perhaps this is a case where, yes, there are probably things that we could complain about with regards to sport in the country, but I'm not going to knock providing financial assistance to elite athletes. And out of all of our representatives, one would argue if Keshawn Walcott is not an elite athlete, then who is? And at the end of the day, it's not as though we were knocked out in the qualifiers or the semifinals and each and every. If everybody was knocked out in the preliminaries or the qualifiers, then I think the money side of it, or at least the examples given, because maybe there are other aspects of the financial assistance that we don't know about. That might be waste. But what has been presented, I would argue, no, that's within reason, and sometimes the ball doesn't bounce your way. However, I do think that there's something to be said about changing strategies. And the Minister of Sport herself has indicated as such. She has indicated that a new approach is needed because something is going wrong. And apparently they have looked to how Jamaica conducts its business with track and field, and that's a good place to start. But I think ultimately, and this is me kind of taking the easy way out, right? As much as I said that, yes, they're paying the athletes some amounts of money, I don't know if it's enough. I have no context on what it is financially they need in order to maintain their proficiency in their sport throughout the year, each year. But I suspect that to some extent, certain things with sport in this country are going to be under-resourced because, generally speaking, everything in this country dependent on public sector financing, dependent on government, is under-resourced. There is not one line item of government expenditure that I believe the government could point to, except maybe things in the energy sector. And even then, T and Tech is underfinanced in a sense by not getting their bills cleared by government offices' use of electricity. Well, that's a kind of an indirect example. It's not really hitting the nail on the head. So outside of that, because we haven't necessarily heard complaints from that sector, education, national security, local governments, health, works and transport, we know for sure those things are under resources because stories have come out about shortages or lack of work done. Sport, agriculture, it's not hard to think that it's the same thing. Digital transformation, yeah, at a snail's pace because we're in 2024 and we're now talking about digital transformation. We're not just now talking about implementing digital transformation. We kind of now start. The implementation process is going to take a while. Why would sport be any different? Now, to some extent, the minister can't necessarily go to that. I do wonder what sort of strategy she could come into play. When you have limited resources, at times the limitations breed innovation out of necessity. But would we be able to do that in this case? And for the most part, recent history will say no, because in other areas of society, we have not been successful. And to some extent, innovation could only compensate for a lack of resources so far. Last story that I'll touch on today, just to mention, the Ministry of Health, they had a press conference, I believe, about dengue cases. Dengue cases reported by the minister went up to 813. That is an increase of 101 cases. Now, not necessarily that it meant since the last report it went up by 101. It's just when the information is compiled, when test results come out. However, with that said, it is a bit alarming. The minister has lamented the fact that the citizens are not doing enough to help themselves and warns that, look, and he's repeated his warnings that if we spray too much, it could harm you, it could harm your environment, and the mosquitoes could build up a resistance. And I think this is one of those things where, to some extent, even if you don't believe the minister, even if you think he's saying complete horseradish, at the end of the day, would it not behoove yourself to try to do whatever you can? Because he said there are over 400 instances, I think it's 441, where I think they got notices issued to homeowners to clean up their properties. And that's the ones that the ministry detected. That doesn't mean that's the entire country. It's only 441 households or properties where they have issues. That's just who they could reach. We don't expect them to be very fast on an exercise of that magnitude. So help yourself with this dengue thing. We're not necessarily going to reach COVID levels of death, but every life lost to this probably would be preventable. Unlike COVID, where was something that we didn't necessarily understand, particularly at the start, and even now, we're still learning about that virus. Dengue is something that we could look back to. We know what this is. We know how it goes. We should be responding better to this. But maybe that's asking you too much. Let's take a break. When we come back, we welcome the good ladies. Stay tuned. This is Talk About WESN show. Michael Small. We'll be right back after this.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Transform your home with PCU Plus. From stylish furniture to the latest appliances, we have everything you need to create your perfect space. At PCU Plus, we offer fair prices and affordable financing options that are cheaper than hire purchase agreements. With convenient locations in San Fernando, Tobago, Arima, and our lifestyle showroom in Barataria, you're never far from the best deals. Visit PCU Plus today and discover why we're the top choice for quality furniture and appliances. PCU Plus. Quality you trust, prices you'll love. Visit one of our locations or find us online to start transforming your home today.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lip?
That's the business. I'm nothing to do with that.
I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement.
If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break the balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put forever.
Why you want the Chiefs to lose so? Why you want the Chiefs to lose so?
They already have two. Lamar don't
Why?
have.
You're jealous because you know the Chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No,
of this game.
no.
Let's go to the last part.
are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Now you don't need to register nothing. You don't need. We can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
They believe in different criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploited the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
And we're back here on Talking Points, the Content Capital, joined by the legal scholar herself, the legal author, former Minister of Finance, Karen Estrashera. And Karen, well, first of all, thank you for joining me.
Of course, it was my pleasure to join you and your listening audience, because I meet so many of them in all kinds of places, yes, decent places like supermarkets.
I just want to say, I'm not going to go into what we were talking about, because I don't want to be accused of tooting Karen's horn too much. I'll just say this. She once again pointed out how people can serve society and give back to society in a very important way. And maybe one day we'll get into that. Yeah, but it's something that she did for the benefit of all. And maybe
it's still being used.
And it's still being used.
So I was told on Sunday.
But with that said, we're here to touch on a topic which technically we have spoken about before, but developments in world news continues to happen. And one of the things we need to understand is we cannot think of ourselves as isolated from international politics for two reasons. One, oil and gas affects us directly and indirectly. And two, American politics affects us directly and indirectly, because not only are we somewhat dependent on their policies with regards to some of our international trade, but also their economy. That's where we import a lot of our food from. So anything that could disrupt them could potentially even indirectly have consequences on us. And conflicts around the world, they are continuing to escalate. 90 billion for Ukraine, 20 billion for Israel, which of course is in the Middle East, which is right where a significant chunk of the available oil is. Ukraine is right next to the Russian oil. We have issues with Venezuela, right, with their oil. So we're looking at a situation just on that alone. To some extent, we have to give it some attention, because the outcome could have some negative consequences on us.
Yeah, I think that's a good introduction. And we always talk, as you know, beforehand, because we always want to be on the same page and agree as to how we're going to develop. And the thing about it is, what Sean said is correct. I mean, if we look at the news cycle, it's the same thing. We're hearing again the economy and crime. So how could we, but there have been significant developments which we've decided today that we would look at, both of us agreed on, that what we're going to look at is a saying that I think all of us are familiar with, which says when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold, meaning the impact of what happens in America impacts us all, and so much so, and we're talking about mostly the Caribbean and of course Trinidad and Tobago. So we're going to use some examples to illustrate that point. Yes, one could say, I could see that in front in a way, that you're seeing this as geopolitical warfare in a sense being played out before our eyes, and that is in not getting into the heart of the matter, but you're seeing BRICS, which is made up originally of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and then South Africa was added, but 4 new countries were added, and they're all Middle East countries. Iraq is one of them, Saudi Arabia is one of them, Egypt is one of them, and Yemen is one of them. And the reason I'm just mentioning it at the outset, and because both Sean and I do agree on this, how quickly they will have an impact, it's going to take time. But the intention, if you read up on it, is that they intend to from their point of view, break the control that the United States is able to exercise by imposing sanctions because the U.S. is still king. The U.S. dollar is still the king. So I just wanted to just bring that in at the beginning to show that the country, this is a geopolitical war, and if these countries are determined, as they seem to be, to change the state of play, including setting up their own bank, equivalent of an IMF, because they said, and I'm not expressing my views, by the way, I want to be very clear about that, very, very clear. This is, we are reporting like our other news cycles do. We're reporting, this is not an editorial in that sense, but what they also will say is that they also want to have started up their own equivalent of their own bank. And that bank is the equivalent of IMF, because what they are saying is that United States too often uses sanctions as a means of controlling or dealing with disputes with alleged persons with whom they have difficulties, let me put it that way. But you cannot underestimate the power of the BRICS, because when I was doing the quick research, what they have said is that they control 44%, I don't want to get the numbers wrong, because one is 28% and one is 44%. So I think the 44% of all the crude oil in the world. And when it comes to money, cash, it's 34 point something trillion, which is about 28%. So you cannot dismiss them as not being big players in the geopolitical world. But that's just to end, that's the end part. So let's say why I said that we do catch a cold. And one of the factors is, of course, is the dragon field. I am not getting into all the what's going on, because it's like, you know, they say in politics a day's a lifetime. It really is true, because I didn't read up today's current position with Maduro and the Supreme Court, but it is very clear that he's being challenged, and challenged, it seems, with evidence from what they call the it's an electronic system.
Or their elections
system,
authority.
And then you get copies of. Yes, yes.
It was on the tip of the tongue when it now happened.
You're right, but this paper version, the paper results, and they're saying they're not adding up. And so that this is what is going on. And also, so NEC, which is equivalent of our EBC, is the only legal authority to announce the results of the elections. And they say they have already announced it, and do not get involved in their politics. But meanwhile, there's a lot of unrest in Venezuela. And how does that affect us? Well, dragon field, that's how it affects us. Because whilst, and a way of showing how much dragon field affects us is because manatee, the Lauren manatee, which is the cross-border, the manatee part of it is in our waters. That's not a problem with America, because it's not in Venezuelan waters, and America is not fighting Trinidad, it's fighting Venezuela, and trying to ensure that they can impose sanctions and limit their access to cash. That's what they're trying to do. So that you saw that Shell did the final investment decision with the manatee, because it is on our southeast border, and they were able to go ahead. Now the dragon field is another story. This has been going on since 2016, 2018. Then they had the COVID in 2019, and then they had the handshaking, and I think it was in 2020, and on and on and on. But the point of the matter is, and I think countries have to understand that, I've said it already, America holds the key to the whole thing, because their Office of Fixed Assets Control, which is a federal controlled office, is the one that determines whether they will give you a license to countries to be able to pay for the natural gas in money rather than in kind, and they can also see how long it can be. And as it is right now, Shell appears not to be interested, and time is running very fast on that deal. And we are in serious problems with that. And that again is the America-Venezuela war that we unfortunately are a casualty. But not only we are a casualty, but the rest of the Caribbean region. And it really becomes even more distressing because they really rely on tourism. And you know the number of hurricanes that have passed through the region and destroyed some countries. I had a guest on Monday, Fazil Khan, the president of the Joint Consultative Council of construction industry, and he said he had gone to Carriacou. He said you could not be. It was devastating. It was devastating to see the kind of destruction in Carriacou, and that has a lot to do with climate change. And so that brings me, before I go on to climate change, let me finish with Dragonfield. So Dragonfield is being really an issue between Venezuela and United States, and we are a casualty of that, and that's why I don't know something is going on very quietly behind closed doors, which I can understand to an extent, but I mean our minister is not known to be exactly very transparent in his pronouncements, so I don't know what to make of it. But the crude oil is the other point. Now, crude oil prices originally, and Sean and I spoke about it, yes, and he reminded me that crude oil prices have started to collapse, have started to fall a little bit.
They've actually been fluctuating. I think there's signs of fears that they're going to rise because of a shortage. There's also, no, is there a shortage? There might be fears that the prices collapse. There might be fears that demand might cause prices to rise. It's uncertain, but of course markets don't like uncertainty.
Right, but okay, so we know there are a lot of reasons. America's had to draw down on its inventory of natural gas. The China demand is not what was expected. There has been some control over the supply chain management system, but the point, which is what our discussion is about, is what's going on in the Middle East right now. And if you read articles, they are saying that the Middle East, what is going on in the Middle East, in which America is playing a significant part. Again, I make no point of view on that. All I'm saying is the presence of America in the Middle, and you're going to tell me about.
Yeah, no, that's what's driving fears about price increases, a Middle East conflict.
It says so in the articles.
Because essentially, because Iran is now involved, although I would argue geographically it might be difficult for Iran to sustain an involved conflict with Israel, but we don't know how far the powder keg might blow. And if the whole region blows, that's one of the main sources of oil.
Which one of those countries, I always mix up Iraq and Iran, which one has nuclear possibilities and signed a deal with Obama that they would draw back on developing their nuclear capabilities?
I think currently right now it's Iran, because Iraq is essentially...
Now, if you look at the world map, let me tell you, they use drones, and they use drones because I am not a Muslim, but I understand from my thing is that there are two branches of the Muslim world in essence. The Shiite Muslims, which are in the minority, but they are in Iran, they are in Iraq, and they have a big presence in Lebanon. The Sunni Muslims are those that majority that are in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, etc. Now, what the issue here is that the U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has sent and has told them to hurry up. He's given them instructions to hurry up to send missile submarines to the Middle East, and also the U.S. Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier Striker. He did this on the 3rd of August. He's sending more fighter jets to the Middle East because of the threats from Iran. Because what happened? What they did with the Hamas is the Hamas and the Hezbollah. The Hezbollah is outstream of the whole war that Lebanon had with Israel, but they have a lot of support from Iran because they are Shiite Muslims also. Anyway, to cut a long story short, the point about it is the second in demand in the Hezbollah, all the way in Tehran, sitting now in a guest house with all of his, on the 51st of July, just 31st of July, I'm making up new days. 31st of July, 2024, the Hezbollah's top commander was killed in South Beirut, one of Hezbollah's main founders. Okay, so that happened with Hezbollah. And then Hamas, the chief political leader of Hamas, was killed outside his residence in Iran. So they are going in Lebanon, on the border with Lebanon, which is shares a border with Israel or Palestine, however you want to look at it. But Iran, it's also they send their drones or whatever they use to, and it was a specific hit. and they got the chief political leader of Hamas was killed outside a residence in Iran, in some guest house. And so what is happening right now is that America is taking a strong position, yes, that it is going to support Israel, as it is doing by sending, without America's support, I mean, Israel would be in trouble because they are surrounded by Middle Eastern countries. But the point I'm making about the sneezing and the coughing is that is causing the price of crude oil to go up. Now, in the heyday when Trinidad was really a producer of crude oil, right, it would have been to our benefit. In 1970s, Trinidad was doing real good. I remember reading articles in the Time magazine about how good Trinidad was doing. So because of the war in Israel, the 6-day war, as they called it, now that we no longer produce much crude oil, it's about 55,000, 53,000 barrels per day. And I think Central Bank says it's gone down by 11%. We are not a producer of crude oil. So what that means, and we don't have a refinery, because what we used to do, to tell people, I've said it before, it's at least 10 years or more. I didn't do the research before I came back. I know it's at least 10 years that we have been importing crude oil from other countries and doing what? Refining it and turning it into aviation fuel, LPG, gasoline, etc. What has happened now? Because the price of crude oil has gone up, and is going up because of the fear of the Middle East crisis, which is still, we don't know what is going to be the outcome of that. Paria Trading Company, which is the importer of fuels, is paying even more than they would have paid before because crude oil is costing more, and then we are not importing crude oil. We are importing refined product of the crude oil. And somebody did a freedom of information on that, and they said in the last 3 months, Trinidad and Tobago spent US $430 million of foreign exchange in order to buy fuel, which we previously supplied. Now, I'm not going into the refinery argument. I am just telling you that the effect of the price of crude oil going up means the price of fuel goes up, which means how much we have to pay in foreign exchange. I don't know if you remember, but about a year or two ago, when the chairman of Paria, Mr. Newman George, wrote a letter to the minister, it was in the papers. He said, I have creditors outside the sea waiting to be paid, and I cannot pay them because you have not sent me, I think it was about 800 million US, in order to pay them in order to get his fuel. So do not underestimate. The point I'm trying to make is that we do not produce crude oil. No matter what they say, the 55, 51,000 is not much. And I don't want to go into the kinds of incentives the government gave to encourage people to do production on the heritage side. The point is, the more the crude oil costs, since we're not refining it, is the more the refined fuel that we have to buy is costing us, and it's costing us in millions of dollars. And that has a lot to do with what's going on in the Middle East, in which America is playing a main part. Also, you were mentioning to me Ukraine.
Well, yes, because, and I think the whole reason what makes this interesting and arguably interconnected is the fact that, look, to some extent, I wonder if either Russia or allies kind of encourage, you know, do a disruption. More importantly, America is distracted with Ukraine, so let's do something now. Big Brother isn't available to help Israel as much as if nothing was going on, right? Now, it seems as though, to some extent, America right now is handling both, but this upcoming election could upset that apple cart, right? At least... And
how it affects us. This is what we're coming back to, how it affects us.
The thing is, of course now, disruptions in the Middle East, because one might escalate, and let's not forget also, right now America is trying to tell Ukraine, whatever you do, please don't start shelling Russian refineries, which will also affect the price of oil, right? But if one escalates...
And affects us because we don't refine oil anymore.
Refine oil. If one escalates, the other one might escalate. We don't know when it will end. Meanwhile, we are importing gas, as you rightfully said. We have a refinery we're trying to sell. The uncertainty now...
After 8 years, and by the way, someone anonymously, but it was in The Guardian, said, if it costs us how much money to start it up now, because it's been laying fallow for how many years, to try to even start it up at this point is going to cost between $500 to $1 billion to start
and of course, you have to clear the debt that's saddled to the refinery, which is of a similar price range, right? But the uncertainty of oil prices now could make it difficult for anybody to figure out a deal to get this refinery online again. And the longer it goes on, as you said, the cost is probably going to go up, and it's going to reach the point where it's just not going to be practical anymore. Guyana said, we're fine, we'll make our own smaller refinery, it'll suit our needs at least for now.
Not only that, Iran is building, two things they're doing, they're refurbishing and one of the major refineries in Venezuela because they didn't have the money to buy the parts or whatever, but they're supposed to be building a refinery. The point is, look at what's going on in the world, how we are an energy economy.
It seems as though America is reluctant to take a hardline stance with Venezuela because it might undermine the opposition, that's what happened to Guaido. They don't necessarily want to do that again. However, I am kind of two minds of that because I know that they're sending all this money to Ukraine, all this money to Israel, they're sending all these assets to those areas. Venezuela might be something they don't want to deal with, so it might be easier just to sanction them and leave them alone.
I don't think you
and if they sanction them, we'll have a problem.
They have sanctioned them.
No, but if they go further and potentially...
If Trump wins, they will go further. And let me
because he was the one that sanctioned
they have the largest supply of crude oil in the world. Okay, and so but the reason why we mentioned those in the beginning is because we are an energy sector, so we're just trying to show how what's going on in the geopolitical environment affects us. But I wanted to move on
in the region, yes,
and good, because he did remind me of that. And then you remember the Petrocaribe when Chavez struck a deal with more than about 12 or 15 out of 18, it started out 12 out of 15, but Trinidad and Barbados was not part of it, to give them very, very, very good terms in relation to having access to fuel and interest payments going over 12 to 15 years. The point is, I don't know if people followed it, but we know that Haiti already is in a state of almost anarchy, and it seems that the gangs are running the country. But what was the tipping point, according to the reports, was when they were expecting a shipment of fuel from Venezuela, and Venezuela by 2019 had run out of ability to do that because the refineries were just not operational. They said that was the tipping point for the total breakdown of any law and order in that country. And you have our own Prime Minister, Ralph Gonsalves. Listen, I love Mr. Ralph Gonsalves, so it's nothing personal.
St. Vincent Prime Minister, not our Prime Minister.
Okay, see, look how much I love him. See how much I love him? You see? So, Mr. Ralph Gonsalves, see how much I love you? So, St. Vincent, I mean, you know, coming and saying, leave everything alone. And he's doing that because understandably, they're one of these SIDS, these small, stands for small developing states with the I can't remember what the I stands for, but they're really affected.
I'll look it up for you.
Huh? Small what?
I'll look it up for you.
Yeah, so those are the ones that are really affected, and he got some fuel in 2022, so he really saying, leave things alone.
Small island developing states.
Thank you. And that brings me to the point of climate change too, right? Because much of the climate change that we experience with the carbon emissions are coming from the industrialized world, and America is a major part of it. Yes, China, yes, India, yes, Australia. But America is a major player, and even after Biden had said all what he had said, when he said we're not going over the sacred ground of the First Nation people, he allowed them to drill more oil wells than was initially intended. He's also allowing the shale oil. And all of that is emitting carbon dioxide, which is creating climate change, and we are seeing it back. And why it is really, really hard on us is because Trinidad is not in hurricane belt, and that's why a lot of Trinidadians like to say God is a Trini, which is really not true. He should not say, but she would do, but he's not. But the point is, they are the ones who depend, they don't have oil, they depend on tourism, and they are getting one hurricane after that, and there's no question there's a relationship between climate change. And I mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning again. Dr. Isran Ali, would be called the president of Ghana, he's doing an interview with a foreign interviewer, one of those international bodies, I don't know. And he was trying to bring Ghana into it, because he's now saying, well, Ghana has so much oil and gas and so on. So he's trying to say, don't you have, in effect, I understood him to be saying, well, you all have to take up some responsibility for the carbon emissions and climate change. And Dr. Sharani put him in his place. He said, if you want to see how much we contribute to the carbon emissions in this industrialized world, is 0.1%. And thank God we have a forest and we have jungles that are emitting oxygen in the air. So if anything you have to thank is I don't think the man had anything more to say. But the climate change is affecting us in the Caribbean, especially the small islands. And it's not only the United States, but the United States would be a big player. They are on our side of the world, and there's no question they are industrialized.
I think it's a key point because a similar thing happened to Africa where, you know, Europe was trying to tell Africa, well, you can't use coal because we're off of coal now, climate change. But
what Germany did.
But Africa was basically saying, this is before COVID, Africa basically said at the time, well, you all got rich off of coal. Why can't we get rich off of our resources now? And at the end of the day, this is why these things like these conflicts and Haiti being in such chaos and Venezuela being in such chaos, it goes against what we need to have, because when global trade is disrupted and essentially money is being lost because of these disruptions, it's harder to deal with the environment and why it needs to be solved. But in the interim, we can't tell Ghana, well, you know, you got all this oil and gas wealth here, but you can't exploit it because we have to worry. We have to all worry about the environment.
About the 0.1% that we have contributed. But before we run out, I just want to know the other points on the economy. So we are an energy economy. So more than anything, the effect of crude oil because of the Venezuela, because of what's going on in the Middle East, dragon feed because what's going on in Venezuela and America is affecting us, the climate change, well, the industrialized world is certainly not us. And the other thing, of course, is the interest rate, the Fed interest rate, which they have used. They say that a lot of Trinidadians, I'm sure we're not the only ones, that what we do is the repo rate, the interest rate that the central bank will charge, which is encouraging the commercial banks not to charge too high a rate. They're getting more bang for their dollar by capital flight, by taking their US dollars and investing it in America, where the interest rate is much higher. And that is the direct effect on our economy because it affects your foreign exchange, it affects sustainable development of the economy, and it affects the ability to close the inequity between those they have and have not. So we see it in the repo rate, and America's inflation rate now, they say it's about 3%, which is supposed to be fairly good because it was 12.8% the other day. But our own is so flat, but that's another thing. I won't go into that. I just want to talk about the things that what's happening in America, how it affects us. So we see in the capital flight, we see in the cost of fuels, we see in the issue with dragon field may not come to pass for a long while, and we see in the crude oil prices, which is not in our interest because Paris is having to pay more for it. We're seeing the impact of all of that. Maybe that's why our local airline is costing so much to fly from one Caribbean. It's like costing so much. I don't mean against Carla, but oh my God.
That might also be our aviation fuel.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, right.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying it must have something to do with it because it's unbelievable, the prices, but I do not know, and I am not going to make a thing. So the last point I wanted to make is the cost of fuels, the interest rate, capital flight, the climate change, and the price, and the Caribbean islands really being impacted by this, and the dragon field deal, and the crude oil prices.
I'll just say inflation. This whole thing about the U.S. interest rates and trying to keep inflation under control, right? Of course, if the interest rates goes up, then our borrowing, which we have already had around just to finance the deficit for this year, that's going to be hard in the future. But if inflation goes up,
we can't borrow much.
If inflation goes up when interest rates goes down, then it might affect our food import bill.
So I know
and the rest of the
Can I
region's
just
food
say this?
imports
So then
bill.
I'm going to invite you to hope some panel discussion this afternoon at 7 o'clock, where I'll deal with the economy and energy. And when you're saying that about the interest rates, you will be surprised that our cost push inflation, which is 0.9%, and America's inflation rate, which we just announced yesterday, I happened to be watching CNN, it went from 12.8 to 3, and it's not bad because you see a lot of recovery is happening. Where the problem is still in the housing market, where prices are still high. But in many ways, people who were looking living off of stimulus packages, people who a lot of the issues that America had are being addressed, and employment numbers are increasing. So their inflation rate is 3%, they were looking for 2%, but our own is a different story altogether.
Right, but what I'm saying is it could go up further if anything goes wrong in America. With regards
what?
to
Our interest rate? Our inflation
our
rate?
food import bill.
Yeah, but what it is, but that means that you know what inflation is the purchasing price, power
No,
of your
but
dollar.
because we importing from the States,
right.
that's why we have
you
to...
think it's States or Dominican Republic? I always see nearly everything coming from Dominican Republic.
No, it's the States.
You sure?
Yes.
What they did? You went in Marcy and check it out or what?
I mean, the amount of foreign food brands that we have on our supermarket
Okay, that's true. I think I'm going to do
and it's American brands we talk about. It's not Dominican brands. Right? Okay.
Okay, but wait. What you must do, after you look at the American brand, very serious thing, look at producer in DR.
Well, listen, very little is actually made in America anymore, right?
That's
but
true.
we still pay in American companies in US dollars.
Okay, but you done that too. Yeah.
All right, folks, let's take a break. When we come back, we will open the phone lines if we have time. Also, Karen has something else to address, something that a caller brought up. Stay tuned. This is Dr. Bernard WSN. Karen is the Sheriff Shaw Michael Small. We'll be right back after this quick break.
Transform your home with PCU Plus. From stylish furniture to the latest appliances, we have everything you need to create your perfect space. At PCU Plus, we offer fair prices and affordable financing options that are cheaper than hire purchase agreements. With convenient locations in San Fernando, Tobago, Arima, and our lifestyle showroom in Barataria, you're never far from the best deals. Visit PCU Plus today and discover why we're the top choice for quality furniture and appliances. PCU Plus, quality you trust, prices you'll love. Visit one of our locations or find us online to start transforming your home today.
I'm back here and talking on a WSN show, Michael Small and the good lady herself. Of course, a lot of people might think, oh, we have so many problems here. Why are we worried about problems abroad? The problem is they translate, especially when we don't have food security, especially when our economy is essentially based on a commodity that is in turmoil, that is unstable because of the ebbs and flows of what's going on post-COVID. And even before COVID, we were suffering in part due to those same, well, I guess you could say at the time it was a low ball or a low period in the price of oil and gas. And it was affecting us then.
And production too.
And production.
You know what you must read, and I'll invite your listeners to read, because I had a guest on one, and he said to me, but you didn't read Colin Mimbert's affidavit when he was talking about establishing the TTRA. If you read that...
oh yes, that was a big story.
Right, no, but if you read it, and he had to come out and say, well, I wouldn't say the truth, that's not fair to say that, but to be more forthright with the public. When you finish it, you will know that he had to admit that the agencies like Standard & Poor's, those rated agencies, told them you have to stop borrowing to finance your debt. You cannot continue, because if you continue and you do not stabilize that, we are going to have to downgrade you. He admitted that the government, and you know what he did it the other day, but that's another story. So all I'm just saying is, I think you would get an eye-opener from the Minister of Finance affidavit in the TTRA. If you doubt the state of play in Trinidad and Tobago, you heard it from him.
And the last loan essentially just financed our current deficit, right? And I would argue...
The whole deficit is 9 billion is the deficit.
Well, no, sorry. Not the deficit, but the unplanned part of the deficit.
The
I think it was.
mean,
The
nearly 5 billion.
Yeah, unplanned part. And
what he did is put 2.3 billion from the consolidated fund, which is your revenue, to pump up the revenue in the revenue side. Because if he didn't do that, it might be 11 billion.
Well, we also don't know what's going on with the situation with the Auditor General's case. That's a whole other story. I will say this.
And we don't know what's going to happen when he has to give his
next
budget and see what the fiscal deficit really is and how he's going to try and twist it into some fairyland story that Alice in Wonderland that we are going to believe.
And that some people might think that Karen's going too far with that sort of phrasing, but I actually will say, listen, whatever the deficit is reported to being, trust me, it's higher because what's not part of the deficit is expenditure versus revenue. But what about the things that we're supposed to be spending on that we're not? Those shortfalls within the Ministry of Education, National Security, right? What the firefighters can't get, what the health centers can't get, what the schools can't get, that are not earmarked to be paid for.
But he's admitted it.
Those shortfalls.
You must read it, paragraph 29 and 19 come to mind. He more or less admitted that this borrowing that they're doing and taking money out of the HSF for the amount of 1 billion and then using it for transfer and subsidies, which we know what that translates into. Those transfers and subsidies is to support a lot of these employment social programs, which cannot bind anyone at all. But he had more or less admitted that those borrowings are not borrowings for capital expenditure, meaning to build up the economy. It's to meet salaries and ongoing debt. That is what he had to admit to it. He had to admit it.
It's funny that
Why
he
do
said that.
Fine is a new
It's funny that he said that because I opened the show turning a saying on its head. You teach a man to fish, you make him independent for a lifetime. You give a man a fish, he's dependent on you tomorrow for another fish.
But that's how they like it.
He's dependent on you.
But that's politics, you see. You know what people don't understand? Well, at least this is just my personal view. It doesn't have to be anybody else's point of view. But in politics is about winning. It doesn't, when you don't win, like the UNC hasn't won, you think anybody cares what they say? Even if allegedly their opposition leader is not the best opposition leader, you think anybody cares what they say? And look how bad things are. Crime is as bad as it could get. Economy, it could be as bad as it. You know who matters? You know who matters? Is the person who you put in government. That is who matters. So that when people say that we criticize the government, who are we to criticize? They're the one running the show. If you were the CEO of a company or the chairman of a company, who am I going to? Who am I going to go? Who am I going to go to?
Starbucks CEO just got replaced.
Right. Who am I going to go to? And wait.
Earnings was down, but a mere 7% or something like that, right? I know they have more in the story now, but my point is, it's not like they're looking at complete financial disaster when they replaced him, and we are essentially your point. And credit to you because you said this even before Imbert admitted it in court over the TTRA. Right? We can't continue with this level of borrowing. We don't have the growth to sustain it. Japan has the growth to sustain a 200% debt to GDP ratio.
That
we don't.
Is true, and
we
you see
don't.
People do not understand that.
And your point that people don't understand that politics is about winning and they want to keep us dependent to keep our vote. The fact of the matter is, people might not understand it from the way you're pointing it out. You are saying it in a plain manner, but the practical truth that proves it to be true is the fact that people vote for those types of programs.
And let me tell you something, having been sufficiently exposed to the politics, at the end of the day, the whole focus is winning that election. Because when you do not win election, I remember when we lost in 2010, they didn't take a day to move me out of my office, They came and they take out the computers, take out everything, I mean, not even a grace day, right? And then it hit me really, all due respect to Mr. Mann, for whom I have a lot of respect, but I have to say that when I saw when we lost the election, I said, look how many people's lives have been affected by this.
Yes.
Because a lot of the people who were getting little URP jobs and the CPEP jobs, obviously the new government is going to give it to their supporters. And if they give it to their supporters, they're going to take it away from you. You know, and these people are dependent on that. So what governments focus on is keeping you asking for a fish. Because we have a democracy, one man, one vote. So you could be Jeff Bezos, right? Yeah. And of course, if you have mental capacity, a beggar on the street, you could go and vote. Your vote is equal to mine. So they understand that. And they understand who they have to get is the numbers. And even if the numbers are low, because they were low, if you look at some of the constituencies, the PNM1 constituency, if you get the report of the last elections from the EBC, they have copies of it.
And the internal elections on both sides are quite low.
Yeah, but even internal elections, you know, that's a whole...
That's always low, yeah.
No, not only that, that's a makeup on both sides. I ain't going to go into that thing. I ain't going to. I'm talking about when you're talking about national elections,
As
right?
opposed to the THA elections, which seems like, you know, they got a bit more... When the Tobagonians came out, they came out a bit more than Trinbagonians.
You know why? You know why it is important? Because when you have the internal elections, at least for the PNM, whoever is the head of the PNM party and that wins the election, let's assume they win. Section 8, I think, of the Constitution says, whoever is the head of the party that commands the majority support in the House shall be the Prime Minister. Yeah. So you have to understand that internal elections is not just about, well, we want this for chairman, we want this. It's about who going to run the country. Yeah. And understand this. This is, they play to their base, and they're not really, in my respectful opinion, they are really not interested in improving them. They're interested in keeping them right there, asking for the fish. So as long as you need me to give you a fish every day to eat, I know you're going to vote for me.
Folks, the phone lines are open, but I'm actually liking where this conversation is going because someone, yes, because someone has told me in the past, it's like, look, when the Prime Minister says things that you don't agree with or you don't understand how he could say that, it might just be because he's not speaking to you, he's speaking to the base.
Absolutely.
He's not speaking to you, it's not for you.
No, it's not
so
for you.
When he says some of the most inane, irresponsible things.
Inane is not even vulgar is the right word to use.
That might sound so horrible to you. He's not speaking to you. Because our politics, to some level, there is a certain...
And he's a good politician, eh? Give him that. He's a good politician.
So then it goes to the fact that I tell the audience that
he's a good prime minister.
Right,
you know.
our politicians respond to what feedback we give them. So if we are telling them, keep doing what you're doing if you want our vote, that's what they're going to do.
They have the power of the purse. And with the power of the purse, they're going to do constant surveys. Surveys. There are people on the phone doing surveys. So they have a good indication where things are going. And if they know, even if they know there's going to be a low turnout, because I think, truly, the impression I get is that the country is fed up with both of them. Mm-hmm. But I think they're more fed up with one than the other. And because they're more fed up with one than the other, they don't care. They say, we in already. So we could say what you want. And that is a dangerous thing, because what you're really looking at...
Well, even in 2010, it took a coalition. It wasn't the UNC alone that beat the PNM. It took a coalition to beat the PNM. That meant to say that there were people who did not want to vote for the UNC. So now that the coalition was...
No, the PNM.
Well, not the PNM, but the point is, without that coalition, without those alternatives to kind of get that, to make up those numbers, the UNC alone might not be able to do it even this time around. Again, third time in a row. We have a call on the line. Good morning, caller.
I'm not taking that on, eh?
Caller, good morning. You're on the air.
Hello.
Hi. Hello. You're on the air.
Yeah, good morning.
Morning.
Karen, you're quite correct when you said that politics is about winning, and winning at all costs. I just want to remind you how they treated Mr. Manning when he lost the election. When he was exiting Balize House in his car, and the abuse that was hurled at him. Politics is really about winning, and winning at all costs. You're quite correct.
Okay, but I want to say something, and maybe, you know, I am very loyal to Mr. Manning, and that is never going to change. It's not going to ever change because I have a lot of respect for him, and I truly, truly believe that he had the interests of the country at heart. And, and you know, and in the early days when he used to talk about you must love, I just said, am I saying this thing is love thing, but it's really true, you know. You really have to love people to do what he did. He gave up his, but I will say in all fairness, trying to be objective about it, I was in the room when they had the meeting, and I can assure you, it was the first time I was in shock at the way they spoke to him. I was totally taken aback while some people spoke to him as if he would do it. I couldn't.
This is after
when they had the meeting.
Before?
This is when they had the meeting before he went into his car and left.
Right.
The council,
Yes.
so he had the meeting, so all of us were in the room. And he came and spoke. The way that he was spoken to, I don't want to go into more detail than that. What you saw happen outside is just a reflection of what. But let me also be fair to people in this thing. I do believe there's a lot going on why he did not win. I won't go into that. But what I do believe is that doing it a second time after promising not to call elections early it angered a lot of people, because there are a lot of people who depend on their jobs and their contracts and so on. A man in the street who cannot survive without that kind of support. And I did feel for them, because it did hit me afterwards. I said, my God, this is affecting too many people.
I just find it interesting that one of the principal actors in that whole play that ended up in that defeat became the next political leader of the PNM. I'll leave that anymore. There. Right? I will leave that there.
And I will just say this. I can say this. I shan't say much on that, except to say that when we were doing polling that is very respected, the major NACTA, right? When NACTA did a polling just between, I think, 2 weeks before elections, right? You know, Mr. Manning, he said, Karen, you have nothing to worry about, whether he's a coming minister, whatever. Because I had the highest, 98% approval rating from my constituency, even higher than Jack Warner, who had 97%, and yet I lost. Well, I don't have to tell you why I lost. I leave it to you to figure out why I lost. I could tell you one thing: I did not have the support of my constituency, and they openly said that
the
they
PNM.
They openly let me know that they supported Dr. Rowley and did not support Mr. Manning. And they openly let me know that. They didn't hide it, so I'm not telling secrets out of turn. But what I'm saying, to be 98% approval rating, the highest in the country, it was in the NACTA poll, highest in the country, and for me to lose my constituency, you go figure out.
Callers, if phone lines are open, you can call and have your say. I started the show saying, look, at the end of the day, we have this interesting dichotomy of complaining about the government, but then large sections of the population are very content on being dependent on the same people that they complain about. It doesn't make sense to me, and we've reached the point now, maybe in the past when we were rich, it might not have been as hard. Now it seems very hard. We don't know who the alternative is. Is it the UNC? Is it somebody else? As it stands right now, of course, the incumbents, the two established parties have all of the advantages, right? And yet, the population, as you rightfully said, political analysts at the very least came out and it's publicized. They have not high opinions of both parliamentarian parties right now. And what are we going to do about it? And I guess it goes back to, Karen, what I keep saying. We need to be more involved, and not just when it comes times to dip your finger in the ink to make your mark. You have to start from now. Yes, we have Claxton B on the line. Good morning, caller. You on the air?
Yeah.
Morning. You're on the air, caller. Don't listen to the TV. There's a delay.
Yeah, hi. Good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Sharon and Sean, right? Yeah. You know, yesterday I was talking about the truth and thing. And that's a very good topic we need to really come on and build a foundation on, telling people the truth. You understand? People want to know the truth. And if we start telling people the truth, we will start to get a best way in this country. One of the things that we don't have in this country is respect for everybody. We have to start letting people know that we need to respect everybody. That is a serious thing that we have. Another thing, I think the best thing we could do, especially for Indian people, is to let them know that they are black people. And I know many of them can't say that. You understand? Because some of them feel that, many of them feel that they are white people. But we are all black people. If there's not black, there's only two.
Oh, gosh.
Well.
And that's what we're supposed to deal with. You understand? Thank you.
All right, caller.
I just want to say to correct him on that. If he just goes on an encyclopedia, because I guess people by now know that I do a lot of research. I just like to do it. I've always been like that. East Indians are not they're not constituted or not considered. They're considered more Caucasian, and that has to do more with their features rather than their skin color. So.
Well, I do think, though, there's parts of northern Iran, and it might bleed into India. No, right, but there are parts of northern Iran, and it might bleed into northern India that technically, I think, are genetically more Caucasian than Arabian.
Yeah, but I don't want
but
to,
yes, there's a cultural thing where the paleness of one's skin tone throughout the world, but also in Asia, is a cultural thing.
I talk about science, I'm not currently sure to see that. I'm going to go look at
Sorry, we have another call on the line?
I'm going to look at the science.
Good morning, caller. You on here?
Morning, Sean. Morning, Karen.
Morning.
So, this morning, your discourse on the Minister of Sport and that meeting that she had with some of those sporting organizations and accountability for the money that was given to athletes. You know, one of the problems that we have in this country with sport is that sport has been relegated to 4th, 5th, somewhere down the line in the school system.
That's kind of high. I might put it lower.
We have had, when I went to school in the 70s, and in my school, I was involved in track and field. I ran 100, 200, long jump, high jump. We even had gymnastics. We didn't have the teachers that could have taught it, but we had the facilities. You know, they could have done the horse and that type of thing, but not the parallel bars and those things. But there was sport. What has happened is, in the school system, because of the secondary economy in the school system, where the teachers have now decided that they have a second income on lessons, which starts in the primary school and moves on to the secondary school. Parents are so afraid that everybody wants their children to move ahead, so they're sending them to lessons from the time they reach standard 2, sometimes in standard 1 they're taking lessons. And that has relegated, and I'm not saying this is the only problem, but I'm talking about in the school system, that has relegated children from playing sports.
Yes.
They have let me tell you something. Remember, a while ago I told you on Keaton, I could take you all around South and in the evening and see all the sporting facilities that the state has built. There are numerous amongst them, and they are totally, in some cases, not utilized. That $160 million Skinner Park that they built over, that is grossly underutilized, Sean. Grossly underutilized. The people that are walking on the second ground are people that are concerned about their health in the main. There is nothing going on in sport in Trinidad and Tobago to push the children. There is no, what you call it, we used to have district sports and that type of thing. Those things have taken a backseat. Sporting clubs where they had track and field clubs, those things they are almost non-existent in Trinidad and Tobago. There's nobody playing basketball. I watched young Mr. Manning had during the August vacation earlier, they had brought down some people from Canada, some organization, to have some basketball clinics, and they had one in South here, and I attended. And let me tell you something. I was appalled to see the level of skill of some of those children who actually playing basketball. Any one of my 13-year-old teams back in the day could beat everybody. It is not just about the money spent on the high end.
Yeah.
We have to have more input to get better output.
Yeah.
And we are not getting sufficient input down to cricket and all. We are not getting sufficient input into the system to get a better outcome when it comes to it. One other thing quickly. I would like somebody to explain to me when the government is saying about food security. I need to see a paper or something that outlines what is this food security that they're talking about. Because I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it at all. I'm not seeing a plan. What is the plan for food security? Is it only to bring down the food import bill? What is the plan? Have a good day, Sean and Karen.
You touched on a good point that I myself have not necessarily put together yet, but what you said, I think, highlights an important thing. We have a Ministry of Sport, we have a Ministry of Education, and it seems as though there's no overall plan or vision by which we will deconflict the two priorities so that they work together. They seem to be working against each other. So what he said there is correct. I mean, it has gone so far. I know, Karen, of a case where what you hear about public schools, the teachers don't teach so they could charge money for lessons after, right? I have seen that in a private school.
But they do it in private schools.
I have seen that in a private school. That is ridiculous.
That is
right?
in private schools
Except
and it got so bad.
Private school teachers actually earn less in some cases.
But you know, it got so bad. No, I don't know if it's public and private. I don't know if it's a combination of children from public and private, because I know when they had the lockdown period, people were doing virtual.
Yes.
And I could tell you, in one teacher's class, she had over 100 students, and I know it was a mixture of both public and private students.
Right. But with regards, going back to what I said, because you highlighted the fact that, look, the whole situation with education is taking away time. We all have only 24 hours in a day, and you have to get some sleep at some point in time, right? If education is taking up more and more time because the academic plan for our youths, I think, has gone out of control, and it might reach the point now where it is a complete mess. That's what I suspect. I don't know for sure. But you're quite right to point out that it's probably impacting sport. And I think this goes to show that when you have no vision, no actual overall plan of which everybody is going to contribute to, so we could see, okay, what do we prioritize? Where do we prioritize? How do we all work together for a whole? This is what you get.
Can I just interject this? And again, this comes from my cynicism. Maybe it's exactly what they want. Maybe they want it just so. Maybe they want it just so. Yes, because if you look at the central bank when they do the monetary report, and they look at the areas that are non-energy manufacturing sector, so they take all the petrochemical, right? They take it out of the mix, which it is traditionally, has been for the last few years. You would see a lot of it has to do with drinks, food, beverages, restaurants. So maybe they want it to be just so. I went to the supermarket this weekend, and I'm not going to call the products I bought, but I'm going to tell you, from a few days ago to 3 days later, it costs $3 more for that same product, and it's not a product that's high end. Medication. I using my whatever you can use to reduce your price. I went to get medication, and I was shocked that in 1 month it had gone up by $300. So I decided not to go back to that place, and I went to somewhere where my doctor said it was safe for me to get it. And I went there, and I paid $300 less for that same medication. Something is terribly wrong when the minister talks about food security. It's not about food security. It's to make sure that those who are using up your foreign exchange and cutting your credit card usage can continue to be retailers, and not bringing any foreign exchange flow into this country. That's my view.
Well, also I think
to
it's
a large
a fact
extent.
that when you don't have a proper vision, then...
But that is a vision.
Well, that's a proper.
Oh, okay.
That's improper, right? Okay. Also, where is the incentive for the government to invest in agriculture
Because that's their vision.
Right?
You don't understand that's their vision?
Hence so the Ministry of Agriculture can talk about food security all they want.
Exactly.
Trade and industry can talk about food, but the plan is not overall going there. It's disjointed. They're going in two directions at the same time.
When you were in school and you used to have a mark for effort and then it give you a mark for results? Well, they have effort, but I never see optics like that. But the results...
Well, the problem is, right, the effort is all in the optics. The effort's not actually...
I'll give them an A for that.
But then, let's take the saying about the fish on its head again. The private sector. If the private sector is strong, and we had a strong private sector job market, well, all of a sudden, we're not dependent on the government anymore. All of a sudden, they taught the private sector how to fish. Right? They're not happy to give CPEP and European workers a fish.
I will tell you something that I was told when I was in government. And it took me a little while to saturate and to understand. But what I was told by none other than the Prime Minister, God rest his soul, I'm not saying anything he didn't say to me. He said to me, you know, the greatest persons who wait for the government to do anything and take the risk takers, they are not the risk takers.
Yeah.
They want to take no risk.
Yes.
The government must take the risk, and then they complain.
And
then they complain. But they're not willing to put out the money to produce what they want to do. You take out the money, and then we will bring in and make it cash, and then we will complain about crime.
Karen, I would have thought that entrepreneurial spirit would have seen, oh, we have a shortage of food. If somebody makes up a proper food production entity in TNT, they could make a mint. But as you pointed out, they don't want to take the risk. They rather use the time-tested model of we'll use foreign exchange to import and retail.
You know how much it was the last time, according to Central Bank, the last figure was $8 billion in food import? Somebody make him plenty money.
And they rather do that because that model, to them, they see no risks. The businessmen, it's easy.
No, the businessmen cannot do that. Listen, I was in government.
Yes, I know they should do it.
No, they cannot do it unless they are allowed to do it.
Unless they're allowed to do it, yes. And
it's like in school. If you give in trouble in school and you give in trouble with the teacher and the teacher don't correct you, who are you going to blame, the child or the teacher?
So the point is to agree with what you said earlier. They don't want to step out from that arrangement.
Exactly.
They don't want to step out from it because it's easy.
Not only it constitutes votes. Don't you understand this whole thing? Listen now, they need a long time, you know. You will sit down there and try to figure it out. It will take you a long time. You might have to ask Einstein to come and help you.
My figuring out is the fact that the population supports this because it's only going to happen. It's just like how the government has to allow the importers to import to get the foreign exchange. The voters have to vote for this. And essentially they do.
But listen to me, Sean.
Back to the caller about the truth, a different kind of truth than what he said.
You know that every day you're reading about 3 or 4 murders.
Yeah.
You know the country has been talking about thousands of murders.
Yeah.
You see anybody do any take any real action in this country? What are you talking about?
I think Project 600 was a flash in the pan.
What are you talking about if we won't do anything about the horrendous crime rate and home invasions and you won't stand up? You know why? And I will tell you this. You know, when you don't have money, this is just, I think it's not an unreasonable analysis. When a country doesn't have money and you're borrowing and borrowing just to keep the pretense going, and the agencies telling you can't continue to do that, you know that you don't want to make a wrong step, you know, because guess what? You know, when the next time contract come up, you're not getting it.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, and we have to wrap up, but what happens when a rich family that's no longer rich borrows to keep the pretenses going? Eventually, the house of cards all comes crumbling down. And with that said, I'd like to thank our callers. I'd like to thank the good lady for joining me once again. It was a riveting discussion this time, touched a lot of topics. I was actually quite entertained somehow. I don't know why this time. It's not like the subject matter was that different, but maybe how it was presented, I don't know. But and yes, the lamentations on sport continues. I might try to continue on that topic off and on in the future as the fallout for the Olympics is what it is. But as my co-host would say, my colleague Mr. Shah, make today a good day. You could do it if you try, and that also means that you have to get involved in the governance of your country as a citizen. Do your civic duty. Stay safe out there. Remember your allegiance to the Republic. We will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Now you don't need to register nothing. You don't need. We can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
We believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploited the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage. And we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.